What's up, everybody? This is the Hedge Mage, and we are back again with another Pauper video, taking another in-depth look at a new card that has just entered the format from Murders at Karlov Manor. And so, in today's video, not only are we gonna be taking a nice little deep dive into that card and how it could be played, what the best decks that could potentially use it. I'll also be going over a brand new brew that I prepared for you guys, so definitely stick around to the end of the video for that. As always, if you would like to support the channel, if you could leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. And with that said, let's take a look at this new card. All right, and the card we got today is a Novice Inspector. For 1 white, you get a human detective. When Novice Inspector enters the battlefield, you investigate. You create a clue token, which is an artifact with pay 2 generic mana, sacrifice that artifact, and draw a card. This is a 1/2. Well, basically, this card is a functional reprint of Thraben Inspector, so you could basically have 8 cards in your deck now that do the exact same thing. When I first saw this card, I obviously thought okay, this card is very good. Thraben Inspector is a staple. Are there decks that actually want to have 8 of these? And I was a little bit suspect on that note, but it does seem now, the more that I've been taking a look at this card and the more that I've been seeing ways that people have been trying out this card, I'm kind of starting to think, having 8 inspectors is pretty good. And there's a lot of different decks that have been trying doing just that. There is kind of a new iteration of Borosynth that I have come across that runs 8 inspectors, as long as things like Koldatha Rebirth and let's say Goblin Bushwhacker, which is kind of turns the deck into a new into a very new direction, making it now a much more aggressive aggro deck, which is kind of crazy. I still myself kind of prefer more of the grindy mid-range deck, and in that deck I don't know if you actually want 8 inspectors, but having more one drops and more aggressive version of it is definitely a very good thing, not to mention all the artifacts, so you can easily get your metalcraft up for galvanic blast if you want to finish off your opponent with one of those. So definitely seems very good in a more aggressive build for synth, as well as I've been seeing a lot of people messing around with it in affinity builds, especially ones that want to run all that glitters, as it is a 1 mana spell that creates an artifact, and now you have 8 1 mana spells that create artifacts. I've also seen White Weenie messing around with this. I actually cut Thraben Inspector from my White Weenie list in favor of Boros Elite, and I kind of feel like there are two sort of ways that you could go with White Weenie. If you want to be, say, a little more grindy, I think running the 8 inspectors is probably a pretty good thing, just because it gives you a lot of ways to kind of smooth out your draws by having those clue tokens that you can use to draw an additional card in case your top deck was not good enough. So you can kind of helps you dig for the cards that you need to try and win the game, or at least put more pressure on your opponents, or build up your own board state. So there is a lot of potential there for that card as well. I really like the running Boros Elite instead of Thraben, since I feel like I put a lot more pressure on my opponents early on by having what is essentially a 1 mana 3/3. I think going either way, or maybe I should reevaluate things and be running Boros Elite along with 8 inspectors. I don't I'm not really sure. The deck is very tight as it is, so it is a tough choice. A Though ultimately, I do think this card is probably has the best home in an all that glitters build of any kind, which that uh, basically All of them are going to be running white mana. Obviously, all that glitters is a white spell, so you'll have access to white. So there's really no reason not to be running these cards or like 8 inspectors because they all are going to create an artifact for you, which is going to help you with your affinity to artifacts, or just like your artifact count for all that glitters. So it helps get a lot of damage through. You're going to be able to cast your Frogmites and your Mirror Enforcers pretty quickly. One deck that I had seen recently and where I thought this was like a very compelling place for it was Orzhov Glitters, which is kind of a sort of another take on the Orzhov Blade deck. Definitely seems like a very strong place for this card. And I feel like the Blade decks have kind of gone off in two separate directions. So if you're trying to go with an all that glitters build for it, definitely running the 8 inspectors seems the way to go. However, if you are instead going for more of a grindy mid-range version of a Tithing Blade deck, I probably wouldn't run 8 inspectors because you're gonna want to make sure you have enough room for your eight cards like your Glinthawks and your core Skyfishers to help bounce your Tithing Blade, as well as having room for things like Goliath Paladin and Thorn of the Black Rose. Because you are grinding mid range, you want to be getting those emblems and just kind of outvalue your opponent. And that's the deck that we have today is Orzhov Glitters. So let's just jump right in and take a look at what we got going on here. So in the deck, I got 4 copies of Ginger Brute. This card is really great as it has provides a lot of evasion when you start playing all that glitters. So it's a great target for that spell since you can make this thing unblockable. You can also use it to gain life if you need to. That's definitely going to come up against any matchup against a red deck. Then we got 4 copies of Glinthawk, which we can use to bounce our artifacts, especially our Tithing Blades or our Blood Fountains or our Ichor Wellspring, so we can just be a little grindy with the Glinthawks. Also got 4 copies of Novice Inspector, 4 copies of Ornithopter, which is a free spell for us, so quickly, and it's always going to be a free spell. Um, Frogmite and Mirror Enforcer are not always going to be free spells. Most of the time they will be, but I decided not to include them in the list and run with Ornithopter for a couple different reasons. One, Ornithopter is always 0 mana. Two, Ornithopter has flying, so it is a great target for all that glitters. And then, of course, we got 4 copies of Thraben Inspectors, so we do have our 8 inspectors in the deck. And then in our instant pile, I got 4 copies of Cast Down since we do want to make sure we're getting rid of any chump blockers or any other creatures with flying or just any threats that our opponent is going to throw at us. Then I got 4 copies of Deadly Dispute, which we can use to sacrifice any of our artifacts, draw a couple cards, and create a treasure token, which is an additional artifact. So kind of nice part about this card. We can also sacrifice creatures. We probably won't, but we can if we need to. Um, but if we do sacrifice an artifact, the real nice part about this card is that it replaces that artifact, so we won't really lose out on our count for all that glitters. Okay, and then in our pile of artifacts, I got 1 copy of Blood Fountain. This also creates another artifact, so for 1 mana, we get 2 artifacts, which is pretty nice. We can also use Blood Fountain to return creatures from our graveyard if we want to spend the mana for it, so it'd be 4 mana to return creatures from our graveyard in case our creatures are getting removed by our opponent. We got 4 copies of Ichor Wellspring. You could also run 4 copies of Lembas if you prefer that kind of play style. Generally, for me, since when I am running things like Deadly Dispute, I like to run Ichor Wellspring over Lembas just because I can draw more cards with it because it allows me to draw an additional card when it's sacrificed. Though there is a kind of upside to Lembas in the fact that you can sacrifice it to gain some life, which is, if you see a lot of red decks, a lot of, say, Koldatha red or Ping or Burn in your local meta wherever you play, you might want to consider running Lemus instead of Ichor Wellspring since you do get to potentially gain some life from that, and that can be very pivotal in that matchup. Then I got two copies of Spring Leaf Drum. With this, kind of just helps smooth out our mana. It is a very card, very much has been a staple in affinity builds for a while. Then I got four copies of Tithing Blade. This is a nice piece of removal that we can bounce with our Glint Hawks and then play for a second time. That's definitely probably one of the main things you're going to be wanting to bounce with the Glint Hawk, is this provides a lot of value for us and helps clear the board for when we do finally play all that glitters on one of our creatures. And then I got one copy of Wedding Invitation because, as always, I gotta put some pet cards in the list. This is definitely a little bit of a pet card of mine. So this lets you draw a card when you play it, but its second ability is really where it starts to shine. We can tap it and sacrifice it and make a creature unblockable. If that creature is a vampire, would gain lifelink. We're not running any vampires, so we don't really care about that second sentence. It's the first one that really matters, as it does provide evasion to any of our other creatures. So we could, play all that glitters on, say, one of our inspectors and make them unblockable and put a get a bunch of damage through that way. So that is why, and I'm just running one of because it's not really, we already have our Ornithopters, our Glinthawks, and our Ginger Brutes, so that is 12 cards with evasion that we can already put all that glitters on. So I'm not really trying to run more than one. But yeah, just as a one-of, it's a nice little pet card in the deck, and then four copies of All That Glitters. This is kind of our main win con in the deck. This is what allows us to do sometimes a one turn kill as soon as it comes down, or maybe in the span of usually somewhere around a 2 to 3 turn clock, really dependent on our board state, though we most likely will be swinging for a lot of damage when this is attached to one of our creatures. And then in our land base here, I'm running 16 lands. We got four copies of Ancient Den, two Darksteel Citadels, four Goldmire Bridges, one Plains, one Swamp, and four Vault of Whispers. So in total, we are looking at about 14 artifact lands. So that's just 14 artifacts in our mana base in total, which is quite a lot. But we are going to take full advantage with that with all that glitters. In the sideboard, I got one copy of Blacksmith's Skill. This can kind of help protect whatever creature we have that has all that glitters on that we are trying to force some damage through with. So we can give it indestructible, and if it happened to be our Ornithopter or our Ginger Brute, we can also give it an extra +2/+2, which, can do a lot. But I'm just running one of in the sideboard in case we are going up against a kind of grindy mid-range or control matchup. Then four copies of Dawnbringer Cleric. This is going to be really great against a number of different decks. Obviously the red deck, since we can gain life. Combo, we can exile cards from graveyards. We can also destroy enchantments, so it's great for the mirror match as well if you're going up against another All That Glitters deck. You can kill there all that glitters. So this creature does a lot for the deck. So it's very powerful. Definitely very much a staple in the format. One copy of Duress, which you're gonna want to bring in against the grindy mid-range control decks as well. Gonna take away any type of interaction they may have, whether it's removal or counter spells. Four copies of Nihil Spellbomb. this fights against a lot of decks, anything running stuff out of the graveyard. So we gotta have our mandatory pieces of graveyard hate here in their sideboard. And then I got 4 copies of Revoke Existence. This can be good against Affinity, decks running all the glitters, other decks that run lots of enchantments. So Boggles or any decks running white that are running things like Journey to Nowhere, being like one of their main pieces of removal. That's definitely the main piece of removal in White Weenie. So this can, get rid of that card after they play it. You can get your creature back, as well as you can exile your opponent's artifact lands. Not as good as Dust to Dust in that regard, but I think it has a lot of versatility, so that is why I am running it in this deck. It's also we're on 16 lands, so making sure we have double white and 3 lands to spare for a Dust to Dust probably isn't going to happen a lot. So I think Dust to Dust is kind of a tough card to play with this particular build since we are on only 16 lands and we're not run and there's even if we were running any ways to tutor those lands, they're all artifact lands, so they wouldn't be able to be tutored regardless. So yeah, just trying to keep our mana curve down. I am running 1 copy of Suffocating Fumes, which is a 3 mana spell, but it is I'm as far as I know, one of the only sweepers that black has, or that we would have access to in these colors. That's at instant speed. I think there is also a white spell that does the same thing. However, it does not have cycling, which is why I'm running this instead, since it does have a little versatility with the cycling side of it. If it turns out we don't really if we don't need this card at the moment and we'd rather draw a card, we can always cycle it to do so. But that is the deck, guys. So, as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the brew and just about running 8 inspectors. Is this something you are going to be giving a shot? And in what deck are you going to be trying it in? I would be very interested to hear about all of that from you. So definitely leave a comment if you can. But this is going to do it for today's video. As always, I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.